Hey everyone, it's Jen.
And this is Lindsay.
And welcome back to Corpus Delicti, the podcast. We are currently still going with our Cases Solved series.
Yeah, so again, keep in mind these are ones that did go cold for a time, but they do not stay cold. So if you like a solved case, stick with this one because they all will be. And this week we have a new case to talk about with you. And this one actually takes place in Keyworth, Nottinghamshire, England.
On October 30th, 1983, a 16-year-old was walking down the street in her small village to meet her boyfriend. She would never make the 1.5-mile trip alive. Now, a little bit about this village. It's not a town. It's not a city. It literally is a village. It's Keyworth. It is very idealistic. This community has grown up with each other for generations. Now, it logs anywhere between 6,000 to 8,000 people. And when you think small English village, this is it. It has cobble roads, historical churches. Those red phone booths are still there.
So Colette Aram was a sweet, quiet, calm teenager. She lived with her mom, Jackie, and her father, Tony, as well as her brother, Mark. And originally, she wanted to be a nurse, so she would volunteer time at the local hospital. Although, she's young, and soon her ambitions started to change because her great aunt actually bought a hair salon. So Colette and her best friend decided after school they wanted to be hairstylists. And her great aunt started to teach them when they were not at school. So they would go home after school, go to the salon, start to learn the tricks of the trade.
It was just a normal Sunday evening on October 30th, 1983. This is when Colette left her home to meet up with her boyfriend, Russell Godfrey. Now, she had spent earlier part of that day baking cookies. Some article says that she made a cake. Normally, he would have come and got her in his car, but it needed repair, so she just decided, why not do the 10-minute walk? Well, it was a little bit after 8 p.m. when she left, and she was going down the road. And around 8:10, she turned onto Nicker Hill. This is where she ran into some of her friends. She stopped, she chitty-chatted a while, and then continued on to her boyfriend's house.
So she was out of sight after departing from talking to her friends when her friends and some other witnesses heard a girl scream, and then they heard tires squealing moments later. Now, put yourself in the perspective of these people. They don't know that it's Colette at this point. They don't know if it's just somebody playing around. They don't know what's going on. It's out of sight. They can't see it happening. They just hear it. Her boyfriend started to get really worried because she didn't arrive. And she was the type of person who was responsible and punctual. So it was very out of character for her to not be somewhere when she said she would. So Russell's parents actually call Colette's parents, and her parents call police at 10:30 p.m. because they had already at this point spent time calling around town, calling her friends. Are you with her? Is she with you? And they couldn't find anything. So Colette's family and friends joined the police, who are now searching for her all through the night. Soon it turns into neighbors, volunteers, and it ends up being the largest search in the village's history.
Now, in a village that is extremely low in crime rate, this kind of crime really shakes it to its core. It's the next morning, and a local man is driving, and he spotted something very unusual in a field. He stops and he takes a closer look at it, and then he is absolutely horrified to discover that it's Colette. The police are there within minutes of being notified, so they ended up there about 9 a.m. This is right after the local man had found her body. It had been stripped of all the clothing and just dumped into this field only about 1.5 miles from where she had been abducted. It actually appears that she had been drugged from the vehicle to the field, and the killer posed her body in a sexual manner. She's also missing some jewelry. It's almost like the killer took a trophy. And what makes this even worse, they called the brother and said, hey, Can you just confirm that this is her? And he sees her in the field. He is going to have nightmares for years, and he doesn't ever truly get over the fact that he saw his sister in this way. Now, her brother is quite a few years older, but that's still his little sister.
Absolutely. Yeah, I can't even imagine. So the police used search dogs to go out there and help find any evidence. They had found Colette in this nearby culvert, kind of like a ditch, and her shirt was loosely knotted around her wrist. Some other sources say that her bra was as well. And the medical reports showed later that Colette had been strangled and unfortunately raped shortly after she had been kidnapped. So it's not like she was held hostage for a while. This was a very quick act. And her head had been beaten by what they thought might be something like a bottle. So the police immediately jump into action. They start going door to door. They're taking statements. They are examining the scene. They have the dogs out there. And a potential witness came forward saying that at 4:30 on October 30th, she was visiting a riding stable and she left her keys in the ignition. Again, very small village, low crime rate. She's just running in the stable real quick. She leaves her keys in her car while she does whatever errand she has to do. She has a red Ford Fiesta. She had been there for only about 3 minutes before a man shows up, jumps in her car, and just takes off in it. So through this testimony, as well as CCTV footage, the police were able to trace some of the moments of the stolen car. So this red Fiesta was seen later that day around 4:30 in Keyworth. It parked outside of a shopping center at 5 p.m. And then about 15 minutes later, it was seen heading toward Church Drive.
The stolen car would be seen again at 7 p.m. that same day, turning right onto Nicker Hill. The reason this is so important is because during this time, he is scouting areas for girls. He has talked to several girls, and he was trying to get them into his car. About 8:15, a lawyer who lived near Colette heard the woman scream. He goes to his window, but the only thing he sees is that red Fiesta speeding by his house.
But that does line up with the time frame that the friends said, because they said that they saw her come to them at about 8:10. They talked for a few minutes. Then she left. They also heard the scream and heard a car peeling out, basically. So that definitely lines up with the time frame exactly.
And what's also concerning about this is he is driving all over town. There are several more sightings of this red Fiesta, but we want to make sure that we tie it back in to what is happening in our timeline. Now, if you go to our YouTube channel, there is a map that walks you through every step of where the Fiesta had been seen. Now, needless to say, whoever this man is, he is not concerned at all about driving around in a stolen car, and he's not concerned about being pulled over. We're going to talk a little bit more about this car and where it was seen when we get back from the break. All right, guys, welcome back from that break. We are talking about this red Fiesta and where it has been seen in and around the town. Now, let's go a little bit later into the evening, and the car is seen again at a local pub. It's called the Generous Britain Pub, which is near Colette's village. The woman who owned the pub, Sylvia Whittleson, also remembers the guy. He had come in wearing a 3/4 length brown suede coat. Now, she remembers him specifically because of his hands. Now, she tells the local newspaper, "I try to forget about that night, but I can remember it like it was yesterday. On Sunday night at 9:30, this chap came in. He was a stranger, and the first thing I noticed was that he had blood in the cracks of his fingers and under his fingernails. I can still see those fingernails now."
So this is interesting for a few reasons here. So she says it was around 9:30 p.m. Again, that does line up with the time frame because Colette was heard screaming by her friends and by that lawyer around 8:15-ish. So that would give time for this horrific, terrible murder to occur and then him be at the pub by 9:30. The other thing that I'm just like, what? Why would you go anywhere in public with bloody hands? And I mean, it's under his nails and in the cracks of his hands. So it's not like his hands are just dripping blood, but still, that just seems careless.
Brazen.
Yeah.
It seems very brazen.
It does. It does. So this man who is in there with bloody hands noticed how the bartender was watching his hands. So he says, "Excuse me." He gets up and he goes to the restroom and he is washing up. She recalled that this man looked to be around late 20s to mid 30s and was about 5'8" with short blonde hair. She did notice some stains on his coat and his gray pants, and he ordered an orange juice topped with lemonade and a Cobb salad. He told her that he had driven up M1 to visit some friends, but they were not there. Awesome job on her part, by the way, recounting this, because a lot of times we've talked so often about eyewitness testimony, and unless there are those key things that make you focus in, it's easy for it to be just another customer or just another person. But she was concerned enough about this that she remembered a lot of those details. So that's awesome job on her part.
And another thing that kind of stood out to her is his story. It struck her as really strange because the pub is not in any way in direct route with what he was telling her. The pub was way out of the way in between those two places where his friends were and the M1. Now, the police were able to recover those bloody towels that he used to wash his hands in that pub. They didn't throw out the trash, and she came forward right away that they could collect that.
Again,
Now,
good on her for that, because that was key right there.
Oh, absolutely. But not only did they find blood on the towels, they also found semen. So now they have two different specimens that they can collect DNA, which is going to be able to crack this case wide open later on. Now, he had told the owner of the pub that his hands got hurt because he was in an accident at a power station. But the police were like, didn't really hear anything about a power station. So they go through accident reports, they go to interview people. There was not an accident at any power station anywhere close.
So this man had been at the pub for about 45 minutes when he left. And at this point, we now know, looking back, that he then abandoned the red Fiesta in an alleyway in Keyworth, and the keys were found under a bush. So a few weeks after the murder, the police actually get a letter at the police station, and it seems to be, all indications are that it is from this murderer. This letter basically said, "You're never going to catch me." It was written on regular copy paper, and whoever wrote it used a mapping pen. But what is interesting is everything was in all caps, and instead of the letter S, all the S's were an exclamation point. And when we say it was written in all caps, it was actually
block letters.
Yeah, it was very, it almost looked like an old typewriter or some sort of font. It was made to not look natural. It was very blocky, very straight, very harsh lines.
Now, the police did go on to say later in some articles that they thought how it was written in that block letters and using the exclamation point instead of the S, that he must have had some computer training or computer engineering background. But this is all conjecture.
Or was it to throw them off so that they can't do accurate handwriting analysis as well? Because keep in mind, when this actually occurs, we're not in the DNA time period yet. So you are having to use some of those older techniques at this point. But the letter says, we're going to read it here. "As it is, you will never find me. I was in a hut for hours waiting for a girl to return from horse riding. No one saw me. When the car came with keys, I could not help but take it. Masks are common around Halloween. No one knows what I look like. That is why you have not got me. I go soon, and then you will never get me. I know I strangled her when a car passed. She would have got me caught, but she was not dead when I left her. Maybe the cold killed her. Cars passed when we were there. I thought she would be all right. I drove around and ended up at Keyworth. I don't know it, so I drove around to find out about the place." I left the car there to fool you and walked back across fields. To show it was me, did she wear a blouse? So he ends it with one of those teasers that only the killer would know. Did she wear a blouse? Well, no, she didn't. It was wrapped around her wrist. So he's trying to tease them and be like, it's really me. They were unable to trace this letter back to the person who wrote it. And at first they're like, look, maybe it's a hoax. But then they got to thinking about it and they're like, no one knows about the blouse. So it's got to be real.
But nothing solid is discovered. No solid leads are out there right now. And the police had interviewed every single man in that village who was over the age of 16. Now, the case, it's not going anywhere. It's growing cold, and the family is just desperate for answers. Who did this to Colette? Now, 8 months go by. It's now June 7th, 1987, and Colette's case is actually featured on the BBC television show Crime Watch. This is a new show on BBC, and it features cold cases, and it's to help generate new leads and showcase the victims. If you're unfamiliar with the show, think of like Unsolved Mysteries. What they do is they talk about the case, they talk about the victims, they do reenactments, and I watched this episode, and time again, they're like, look, the guy that we're featuring on the video is not him. Don't think it's him and don't report him, but if you know something, this is to help jog your memory. And what happened is, it generated 400 tips, and it gave the detectives on the case new information to go on. And because of this, the investigators were able to eliminate over 1,500 suspects from their list of suspects. So it sounds like everybody in the town, if you're older than the age of 16, is a suspect. And what they were doing is they were casting this huge net, and they were trying to walk themselves in to the middle to where the real guy who did it. They cast a huge net, and they go through by process of elimination.
But although they were able to eliminate 1,500 suspects, they still hadn't found the person. So the case does grow cold again. On the 20th anniversary of Colette's death, it has been a long time now, the show Crime Watch featured her story again in 2004, and they're trying to renew interest in the case. Hey, maybe somebody remembers something now. Maybe somebody heard a relative talking about it. That did not pan out, but her case was never forgotten. So in 2008, forensic technology has gone through several advancements now, enough that DNA could now be used to help solve crimes. And we know that there is DNA in this case. They had the blood from the towels from where this man, who they assume killed her at this point. It's not proven, but they're thinking that that's a good route to follow. They have the blood, and they also have the semen. So,
you know what I didn't hear? I didn't hear anything about fingerprints or DNA from the Fiesta. Nowhere in the articles did I see anything about fingerprinting, but they may have done it.
Or he could have wiped it down. So the police asked the public to volunteer to provide their DNA samples by mouth swab. And they said, look, we are going to either rule you out or find you in this way. Now, this has been proven to be very successful in the past because this is how police arrested the M25 rapist. And we also saw this, I believe, in the Colin Pitchfork case where they did the mass DNA testing. I believe that's the one that it was. And the result here was tremendous. They actually got a lot of support from the village. Again, it's a tight-knit, small community. They received over 100 calls as well. But we need to go back in time just a bit in this story. So put a pin in that doing the mouth swabs for DNA.
It is going to be a simple arrest in June of 2008 that is going to break this case wide open. Jean-Paul Hutchinson is arrested on what England calls a motor charge, so a bad traffic violation. The police took a mouth swab and collected his DNA. Now, in England during this time. It's just they're part of their standard protocol. You get arrested, you're going to get swabbed. The police ran Hutchinson's DNA, and the results are shocking. They get a huge hit off this kid. 96, 97%. I mean, it was huge. This was a huge hit. It's exciting, right? This is the guy who did it. Case closed. Unfortunately, he's only 20 years old. He was not even born during the time of Colette's death. But in cases like we've covered before, the DNA gives the investigators a lead. And they would take this all the way to an arrest. The DNA swab taken from Jean-Paul provided a familiar match to a genetic material found on the paper towel at the pub where the killer stopped for his meal. You know, the Cobb salad and the lemonade and orange juice, which doesn't
that's gross.
It does sound gross. So the DNA leads them to Jean-Paul's father, Paul Stewart Hutchinson. Now, Paul is 51 at the time of his arrest. This lines up with the timeline because it would put him at 25 years old at the time of the murder.
So let's take a moment and dive into this real quick. So the match on the son was close, but not quite. But again, as we know with the familial DNA, they're able to trace it back and get closer in. So then they test the son's DNA with the DNA that they have on file, and they find Paul, and Paul is the guy. So he is arrested. This match is the match. It's not a 97% match. It's the match as close as you can get. So Paul was in his second marriage. He had 3 children. He had received his psychology degree, but he was working as an electrician, and he also delivered newspapers on the side. He did not have a criminal background, and Hutchinson's DNA has not been found at the scene of any other unsolved crime. Super interesting to me because we know that night he was scouting out people, or the person who wrote that letter said that they were scouting out people. And we will find out later that is true, and that Hutchinson actually approached 2 other teenage girls that night with a butter knife. And remember, the theory was that Colette had been taken at knife point into the car. So, on the night of the crime, where was he? Does he have an alibi? What's his story? Well, his family actually believed that he was in the hospital having a lung removed because he had lung cancer. He actually had even shaved off or cut his hair down to make this more believable. It was not true. He did not have cancer, but he tells his family, I do, and I'm going into surgery. That's also very strange to me because why wouldn't you be there with your spouse at the hospital if something goes wrong, or your father or whoever?
He is thought to have been a peeper in the sense that he liked to watch little girls without them knowing. They had found a rag in the hut. Remember back in the letter he talked about watching girls as they rode horses? Well, in the hut where the red Fiesta was stolen near, it had semen on it. Paul denied all involvement, of course. He's saying, look, it's not me. He claimed that the crime was actually committed by his late brother, Gerard. Now, Gerard is unable to deny any of this because he had died in January of 2008. Very convenient for Paul because his brother's dead. Now, the family did select to cremate the body, but cremation does not stop the police by any chance because the hospital actually kept a blood sample of Gerard, and they tested that blood sample against what they found at the scene. It didn't match, so him trying to steamroll his brother doesn't work.
Yeah, and they're able to tell that his match is way, way closer, and they're like, look, that doesn't just happen. So Hutchinson told police that he could not remember the murder. He described it as being like a dream. So he's like, look, you've got me now. You've got the DNA. You didn't buy the story about my brother, but I can't tell you much else. I just don't remember. So he was arrested, as we said, and he pleaded not guilty originally on October 5th of 2009. But after his pretrial hearing, he did change it to a guilty plea on December 21st of '09 because, again, he's hearing all the evidence. He's hearing the statistics on the DNA and how precise it is. And no, it's not 100%, but it's so darn close that it's, 1 in so odd trillion that it's him. So he's like, all right, look, you got me. Eventually, he confessed to prison inmates as he was awaiting sentencing. He was eventually sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 25 years by the Nottingham Crown Court for the murder of Colette Aram.
Colette's mom, Jackie, said that the sentencing did bring her and her family some relief, but they still didn't know why she was murdered. And when they questioned Hutchinson, he absolutely just refused to answer. She ended up moving to Greece after her daughter's murder to get away from the village. It's got a lot of traumatic memories for her, and her daughter were really close. At 8 a.m. on October 10th of 2010, 9 months after sentencing, and only 18 months after custody, Hutchinson was found unconscious in his cell. So he was passed out. He had been on suicide watch just days before, but the prison officials made a decision. Say, hey, let's take him off of suicide watch. Healthcare providers was not in the discussion. They didn't contribute to the conversation. And the prison did go back later and say that that won't happen again. But he is off suicide watch. They find him unconscious. Paramedics are called in. They try to resuscitate him. But he did die at 9:58 a.m. in the ambulance on the way to the hospital. Now, the theory is that he just overdosed on his medication. All of the post-mortem reports or toxicology came back. They were all inconclusive.
So Hutchinson's daughter had told the investigators when they were looking into his death and why he was taken off of suicide watch and all of that, that he had asked his wife to come and meet him in prison the day before he died, but she did not show up. But so what they're thinking is that he was wanting her to either bring him something or he was wanting to say goodbye. And then when he finally had a moment where he wasn't being watched and monitored all the time, overdosed on the medication. Jackie, who is Colette's mother, said, "We are never, ever going to get closure because we never got answers and we never will," which is so heartbreaking. Again, I don't know if closure exists with something like this, but you do want those answers. You do want to know why. I would want to know why. Why my child? Why the joy of my life? Why did you pick my daughter, my son? I would want to know too. But according to Colette's mother, Colette was very happy. She was always laughing, always smiling. She always thought about other people, and she was a very caring girl. She was very popular, very well liked, and everybody loved her. What really is confusing to me in this case is that Hutchinson did not have a criminal record. They did not find his DNA at anything else. They ran it against other crimes. So where did this come from? Did he just one day at age 25 say, I'm going to go hunt for these teenage girls? Or had he committed other rapes at least that they just didn't connect him to because maybe the victims didn't report it for whatever reason? Maybe they were scared, maybe they were traumatized and didn't report it, because that seems like just 25 years old, wakes up one day and is hunting a bunch of girls one night. And I mean, maybe they said that Colette had that head wound. Maybe he hit her with something to subdue her and then ended up, accidentally killing her.
He did go back and say that, there was a lot of cars passing and he felt that, he was going to get caught because of how she was crying out. So maybe the intent wasn't to kill her.
And that letter that we are assuming he legitimately did send says, I thought she was still alive and I just left her there. Maybe the cold killed her. So perhaps, but then also it says, according to the post-mortem reports, that her sexual assault, her rape happened after. So I don't know.
Yeah, and one of the things Jackie did say is that he never showed any remorse and he took the coward's way out.
Absolutely.
And he left this family devastated. The brother never got over it. The mom had to move to a different country, and she still has to work through it.
Absolutely. Yeah, and it sounds like he was just a gross, creepy predator because Colette was not his only victim that
Target.
night. He had his eyes on other young girls. So unfortunately, as sad and just awful as it is, it sounds like it is the case, and you hear it so often, just at the wrong place at the wrong time, you know? And it's so wonder those friends didn't see anything. If he would have turned the corner a little bit sooner and seen her sooner, would he have even been able to? Because she would have been with her friend.
Exactly.
Which is also really sad.
This sounds like it was a crime of opportunity.
Definitely. Yeah.
All right, guys, don't forget, if you want to hear this podcast ad-free and you want to join us on our Discord server, we have Patreon. So go to patreon.com/Corpus Delicti. $3 and more gets you on our Discord page, which is an open chat forum. Many topics are had. Many great conversations are had. Also, you get to participate in our live Patreon Zoom events where we cover a story. Sometimes it's similar to the case series that we're going through. And then we have just like a fun little chat session afterwards. So it's a really cool, fun little hangout place.
Speaking of, this episode right now drops on January 31st. So January 31st is the Patreon live date for January. So if you are a Patreon member or if you want to be, go sign up. And the link for tonight's Zoom will be posted on Patreon 30-ish minutes before. And then you can join, hear 30-ish minutes of story, and then hangout time, like Jen said. So that's always a good time. You also get stickers and goodies and chapstick if I haven't mentioned it yet today. I'll stop talking
Only
about
twice.
I'll stop talking about it. But also, May 6th, Birmingham, Alabama, Wild Roast Cafe. We are doing a version of what we did in Atlanta this past December. It's going to be several podcasts, which we will release the names closer to time. Some have officially committed, some have not yet, but are trying to. And it'll be a panel style, telling stories, asking questions, presentations, that type of thing. So that's really awesome. Going to be a fun time. We're excited to host it here in our home city.
And also, don't forget to hop over to our YouTube page. Right now on YouTube, we're displaying Rocky's QR code. So Rocky Myers is the gentleman that we are fighting for, who is on death row, who Lindsay and I and a lot of lawyers believe that he did not commit this crime. To hear the 5-part series we did on Rocky, scan that QR code and it's going to take you right to those episodes. Also, don't forget, we have letters of clemency. If you choose to help support Rocky in his fight for freedom, they are there as well. And you can find everything and more just by scanning that QR code on the screen now.
And Jen has been doing the YouTube. Is it at the end of the last episode or this episode? So if you watch the YouTube, it pops up at the end. And it's also got a link to other articles that have been written about him, a petition, all sorts of different resources where you can learn about Rocky's case and how to help him.
Don't forget our merch store. Go to the show notes, click on that link. We have hoodies, shirts, chapstick, and a bunch of other fun stuff. So
the
don't
chapstick
forget,
is not on the store. I'm hoarding that. That is not on the store. That can only be gotten through us, by the way.
But until then, you know what they said to Felicia.
Bye.
Bye.